You know, doing YouTube is hard. It's a lot harder than it looks. So hey guys, how you doing? Cell here, and last night we had a really good stream, really good turnout, a lot of good conversation. I kind of struggled and futzed around in Axiom Verge for about an hour before figuring out how to move on. And there goes my fucking phone. So I don't know how it is in your area or what's going on around you, but I'm seeing more Xboxes, Series S and Xboxes coming up every once in a while, and it's a little harder to say than you think it should be. But I still have yet, after this many months of the PS5 technically being out, to still see a PlayStation 5. I've not seen the retail box. The closest thing I see is a kiosk, and even the kiosk doesn't have a PS5 in it yet. There's nothing running in it. So it's like, this area, at least for me, I haven't seen anything. Maybe because I'm so close to Seattle, maybe that's why I'm seeing more Xboxes. But I seem to be hearing from a couple other friends too, saying, hey, I'm seeing these Xboxes out in the wild every once in a while. If I see one, should I just go ahead and pick it up? What's your thoughts on it? Or I've had a couple other friends, like my friend David, it's been like, you should just like, the more I see you using the Xbox, I should just get one. I think it looks cool. I have some thoughts on that. I wrote some stuff down. We're going to go over it. We're going to talk about the Xbox. But really, at the end of the day, I want to say this. Don't worry about getting an Xbox if you just see one over a PS5, if the PS5 is really what you want, and that's where your friends are at. Just hold tight. You'll eventually get it. Don't worry about it. Eventually, more will get made. You'll get it at the right price. Don't pay stupid amounts of money for any of these things. I sure as hell wasn't. I just got lucky and got it at MSRP. I didn't pay over the $500 for the Xbox. But at the end of the day, it's this next gen experience is not anything that mind blowing that you need to worry about. I think the biggest thing is just the overall speed of these consoles. As far as graphics, you might and you might not be able to tell that much of a difference. All right, so let's start with things I actually hate about my Xbox. The thing is stupid large. It is huge. And like the thing that blows my mind is people are telling me that the PS5 is so much bigger than the Xbox. Like to give you a size comparison, it is really about the size of like two GameCubes stacked on the top of each other. So if you know how big a GameCube is, but it's just such a weird, awkward size. I've actually had to take shelves out from my entertainment center. I used to have 3 shelves in there, one for my Switch, one for my old Xbox One X, and some games on top or controllers or something. I took all those out. It's just game consoles in there now. There's no room for anything else. You can set it on its side, but that doesn't really make it any less awkward. And if anything, you probably shouldn't do that, because if you're setting it on its side and it's sticking in a small shelf area, it can put out some heat. And when you're doing that, you're kind of just like throwing heat out and throwing it back into the box and just warming it up more. And I notice like when you do that, it tends to ramp the fan up more, which is going to kill one of the advantages. So really, honestly, I feel like this box, although you can use on its side, it's really meant to be used up and down, and that's the best way it cools. My God, I don't know what they were thinking about with this or why they did it, but AA batteries, still, Microsoft. I mean, they say people, do polls or something. I don't know where they're doing these polls at, but they say they do polls and people just keep on coming back. They say, I want to be able to replace my batteries. And I'm like, that's all great. And to be honest with you, like when you get the controller in a box, you can just get, spend some extra. It was like $30 for me. I got the add-on battery pack, the rechargeable battery pack, and it gives me about 30 hours of charge time, which is even better than what the PS5 controller is doing right now. But it's one of those little extra things that's kind of a pain in the ass, and just don't really want to deal with it anymore. So there have been improvements on the UI, I want to say that. But the UI is literally still running 1080p. It's just a carryover from the One X or the One S. And really, honestly, still to this day, it's not like as intuitive as something like the Switch UI, where there's just a carousel of your last 12 played games. There's like a thing off to the side for all your games. You can just go down alphabetical order or whatever. That feels very much like a machine that's meant to be for games. Microsoft's console feels like it's trying to be a little bit for everything, and because of that, where you go, how you get there, like the settings is considered an app, okay? So you open the app settings to set things like what your HDMI or your resolution or any of that stuff is. and it's just annoying. You can tell it's made by somebody that makes the Windows operating system, because there's just points in it where it's confusing and stupid and dumb. Once you get used to it, you're fine. But it's, compared to the other UIs I've seen out there, this could be better. Can't speak for the PS5 UI, but I've heard from friends that do have the PS5. It ain't so great either. Okay, but that's it as far as the dislikes. I really couldn't think of anything else, and I really tried. I couldn't find anything else I disliked about the system. Maybe you could say like the SSD being proprietary, but if we're being honest, when I thought about that, it's an NVMe PCIe Gen 4 card, essentially put into like a little proprietary wrapper. But if you look at how much like 1 terabyte one of those is going to cost and how much they're charging for this, it's literally almost like within $10 of. It's like normally you would pay like 220, 230, 240, and you can get this for like around 220. So it's really just in that same price range. I don't see it as a big deal. And if you don't think 1 terabyte's enough on your console already, and you're not going to go and just be like, well, I just need like a 256 gig card. No, you're going to go get the 1 terabyte or higher, and they'll eventually probably come out with like higher or even lower cards. Okay, so my first like about the console, it is fast. It is blazing fast. You do not sit there and wait. I remember on the One X, you had to sit there, you could hear the hard drive kind of chirping away. You know, it was a little bit better than the One S or the older Xbox, that much is for sure. But it was just still like you were kind of sitting there waiting. Sometimes like the UI would hang. This doesn't hang at all. It's stupid quick. When you bring it from sleep, it's on in a second, right back to where you were. One of the other things that's great about it is if even from like a cold boot, it's like 7 seconds from like boot up to actually in the menu doing stuff. It is so fantastic. I love it. And the other thing I like about it is something called Quick Resume, which is a function of the SSD. And that allows you to basically it's a memory swap or a memory dump. So it takes the 16 gigs of whatever game you're playing the most. And when you go to close it out, it takes that 16 gigs of memory and dumps it to the internal SSD. And then later on, when you go to play it, it'll recognize that's a game you've been playing a lot. And it takes that memory, that entire memory dump, puts it back onto system RAM, and you're just right back to where you were again. You're not going through like the title screen or any of that stuff, just right back to where you were. The only thing you might notice, I notice some games do this, is like when it first comes on, the game kind of like hitches or stalls for just a quick second, and then it's right back, and that's really the only problem. I've not even noticed like really any problems with like quick resume. I will say though, it would be nice to tag what games you want to do quick resume on instead of having the system figure out what it should do quick resume on, because maybe I want to switch the game out here and there, and I've noticed every once in a while it'll quick resume something I'm not playing that often. And so I just like to sit there and put a little flag and say, no, these are the games I want you to quick resume. Don't worry about it. Because like Call of Duty, I'm playing that online, and when he goes into quick resume from that will cause it to like, it times it out. So you have to like sign back in and all that stuff. You might as well just boot the game up anyways. And sometimes I have to do that to fix that problem. Okay, backwards compatibility is freaking awesome on this thing. It is so good. And the fact that like all original Xbox games, like the old like Splinter Cell games and stuff that I've been playing and all that, actually just don't even run on it, but they run it like in 4K, like all those. There's like select like 360 games that run in 4K. And then like all the old Xbox One games just run on this thing flawlessly, like disc or whatever. The thing I love that they did on this that they didn't necessarily have to do, and especially seeing how these run. So these require some patching over top the original game to get them to run, which means if you have the original disc, it's not actually running that code. It downloads it from Xbox Live. But if you have the original disc and put it in, it works. It just downloads it from Xbox Live. It basically makes your disc like a key at that point. But these things come up on sale all the time. You want to play like the original Assassin's Creed. It's on sale right now. Like the old Splinter Cell games are like $5 each on sale right now. And so you can just download those and play those as well. But the fact that if you have like the old discs, you can just pop them in there. And if it's in the backwards compatibility list, it will work. The other thing that's really cool is I've been playing Red Dead Redemption 1, not 2. And Red Dead Redemption actually had a patch added where it'll run in 4K. And I was talking about this before. And it looks amazing. It looks so good. There's a couple other functions of backwards compatibility on here that I absolutely love. And One's is kind of getting off the ground. The other one's pretty well established. One is called Auto HDR. And it's one of those things like depending on the TV you have, you might not see it. So the old TV I had with HDR, it's like, yeah, I can see the highlights and lowlights a little bit better and stuff like that. But it wasn't like blowing my mind until I got LG OLED and I saw HDR on that, and I was like, my God, this is freaking amazing. Like now I know what HDR is supposed to look like, and it looked so freaking. I was playing Star Wars: The Fallen Order last night, and I was just like, and some of the dark scenes and stuff when the lightsabers going off and all that, it's just like it's almost like blinding in some cases, at least for me anyways. I have friends that are like, I could still use more brightness, but yeah, it looks so good. I love it. So to see these old games all of a sudden get auto HDR, and it doesn't really make the colors pop anymore or anything like that, but it does make the highlights and lowlights really stand out. So when you see like a light on a dark street, like a spotlight or something like that, it's really going to look like a spotlight. Like it's really going to stick out, A new one that's happening that I have really just one game that I messed around with is called FPS Boost. What FPS Boost is the original game would say I'm running at 30 FPS. FPS Boost is running at the DirectX level, and it ignores what the game's telling it and runs it at like 60, for instance. So they can just easily patch into the DirectX side of the game and just say, okay, now you're running at 60 because you have the overhead, and I'm going to ignore what you're telling me, okay? And I've done this in Sniper Elite, and it works great. It runs so smooth. It makes the game so much better when it's running at a higher frame rate. Like, I'll take 30 frames per second if that's what's available, but if you can put 60 in there, I'll obviously take that all day. And I really feel like having 60 in these older games, I really find that these older games are just as relevant today as they used to be, because there's a lot of people didn't play them. And on top of that, as we know, AAA games are not like what they used to be. You used to see AAA games like come out all the freaking time, but now these games are so complex and have so many systems, and the programming's so complicated, and the art is so complicated, and all this. It takes years for these games to come out. So there's like these big lulls of just like really no AAA games. So having the ability to go back and have this backwards compatibility, not only be able to play these older games, but play them at better resolutions with HDR, with a higher FPS, is just awesome. The controller is actually just that much better. They didn't change much, but the texture on here, the triggers on here, with that little texture on the triggers and the bumpers and on the back and the way it's shaped, it just feels better. I absolutely love this D-pad on here, if you can see it. And the fact that they have a share button, because you guys follow me on Twitter, every once in a while I'll share like content and stuff off of my Xbox or my Switch with what I'm playing. And just having that there instead of having to find like a workaround or talk to my Amazon Dot or something like that to get the Xbox to do what I need it to do. So that's pretty cool. It does suck that it takes AAAs, or I should say AA's, but you can just get this battery pack, like I said, and it comes. The thing that's confusing is make sure you get the one with the USB-C cable, because this is USB-C. But the feel of it and everything, it just feels refined. And really, I don't need that much gimmick in the controller. I appreciate what PlayStation's trying to do. And I kind of wish the one thing they would have brought over to this is haptic feedback in the handles, at least. I really like the way that Xbox handles their trigger feedback through vibration, as opposed, because it's like a real quick kind of vibration. And so if it's me, I would rather have like the gun click and vibration than actually have something holding back the trigger, because I could just see that being something that kind of messes with my like response time in games like Call of Duty and stuff like that. Most games, it doesn't really matter, but just for me personally, I actually like the vibration in the triggers as opposed to the resistance and stuff that's in the PlayStation controller. I have messed with the PlayStation controller. It's cool, but I could also see like where my fingers would get tired or something like that after a little while. And I'm just never ever going to be one of those guys that just like symmetrical stick layouts. I like asymmetrical stick layouts, and that's just the way I am. Okay, last couple things. This thing, despite it being huge and taking up a lot of space and all that stuff, when you have a nice bit of air, like space around it, and it's got a good amount to throw like air out the top of it and all that, this thing is dead quiet. It is so freaking quiet. I cannot emphasize how quiet this is. I can usually hear like right now my computer's on, and I can hear that computer whirling its fans a little bit here and there as like it's like ramping up and down every once in a while. I've I've put my ear right up against the Xbox, and the only thing I can hear is wind. I cannot hear the fan whining, making any noise, any of that stuff. The only times I've ever heard the fan is one day I was like playing some Switch game, and then I stopped and I had the case on top of the Xbox because it's a flat surface. And when I see flat surfaces, I'm dumb enough to stick my drink on them. I'm one of those kids. But I stuck my Switch game on top of it, and it blocked the airflow, and it had to kick up the fan to keep the console cool, so I could hear it then. As soon as I removed it, 5 minutes later, the thing was back to whisper quiet. So as long as you're mindful of that and you make room for that, you are never going to hear this thing. It's going to be quiet unless you put like, the only time you might hear it is if you buy a physical disc, then the Blu-ray drive is going to make more noise than the rest of the console is. You are not going to hear it at all. All right, and the absolute last one, the last thing I love about my Xbox is Game Pass. Game Pass is freaking incredible. It is one of the best gaming deals I've ever seen in my entire life. I love it. Yes, I don't own most of the games on there. I do own some of the games because they were leaving Game Pass and I wanted to own them, so I bought them. But at the end of the day, like, it saved me so much money. Like, a lot of stuff, I like to play it, but then I usually don't end up loving it that much. I'm okay with, like, letting it go. It's so cool. Now, the thing that's funny is I hear a lot of people going like, but you don't own your games. And it's like, well, you weren't going to own that game anyways. It's kind of the way I look at it. It's similar to like when I was a kid. It's funny because this argument's coming from people around my age. And I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, are you completely inept? Because I remember when we were kids and we had places to rent games. I remember a place I rented games a lot was a place called Farmore. And I don't know if anybody else knows Farmore or if they're even around anymore. But they had games to rent all the time. And we would go there and rent an NES game and then later Super Nintendo games. And that's how I got to play a lot of these games for the first time. If it wasn't for renting games, I would never have played Super Metroid or known what Metroid was because I sure didn't see it during the original Nintendo days. And it is by far one of my favorite games of all time is Super Metroid. So I would never even done that or picked the game up later on in life and stuff and played it if it wasn't for that experience. But I guarantee you that back in those days, the money we spent per month just renting, because like we would typically rent like 2 games every weekend or something like that. We spent way more than $15 just on games. And there was plenty of times where, like, say for instance, my mom would have Monday off and she might go back, so then there's late fees and all this stuff. So to get literally access to hundreds of games for $15 a month, and it's not even $15 a month necessarily. If you're on PC and you want to do this on PC, you don't pay that much. I think it's like $10 or something like that. Dude, try to argue with me that this is a bad thing. I think what people think is that this is going to take over and be like the only way you can play games in the future. And I'm sorry, I just don't see that happening. I don't see any way that makes sense because at the end of the day, I think really what this is about is getting butts in the seats. And there's going to be that game that people are going to love and they're just going to buy it anyways. But they've had Game Pass to experience that, right? And the kind of the benefit of that is they give you a little bit of a discount for it. At the end of the day, though, they're always going to sell the games because they're going to have any kind of way to make revenue that they can. And so I don't see that model going away anytime soon. Okay, so that went on a little bit longer than I wanted to, but those are my thing. That's kind of like my insight on the Xbox so far after a couple of months of owning it. And should you pick one up in the store? Like I said, at the end of the day, if you really want a PlayStation, that's what you should be picking up, not an Xbox. Just because it's there is not enough of a reason. All right, so if you guys liked what I had to say or have any thoughts of your own, hit the comments down below. Give me a thumbs up on this video if you liked it. Please hit the subscribe and the bell button on your way out, and I will see you in the next video. Later, guys.